Hello everyone, and welcome to Classic Gaming Today, where we take a look at the gaming experiences of the past through the eyes of the present. I am your host, Tony, and today is a special day because today we finally finish our Action 52 deep dive. We are going through games 40 through 52. It has been a journey. As always, I'm excited to be here. I hope all of you are as well. If you'd like to reach out, let me know how I'm doing, provide feedback, comments, suggestions, or just talk about classic games and technology in general. I would love to hear from you, and there are a few ways you can reach out. I have an X account with the handle @ClassicGamingT. I have an email address, which is classicgamingtoday@gmail.com, and we have our Discord server. The link is in the show notes. Discord is the best way to get in touch with me and the rest of the community around this podcast. We have a ton of fun out on Discord. We do weekly and monthly gaming challenges, prizes, rewards, discussions. It's all out there. I highly encourage you all to check it out. I also highly encourage you to check out our Patreon. It is patreon.com/classicgamingtoday. If you want even more Classic Gaming Today goodness, including a Patreon exclusive bi-weekly podcast expansion pack, patreon.com/classicgamingtoday is where it's at. I'd also like to give a shout out to our Pantheon patrons. They are ISO, Rich Senewal, David Morton, Sam Twardowski, Sean Oliver, and Maximus Marshall. Steve Novoselic, Wendell Jr., Chris Snowden, The Bay 101, Toucan Sam, Christopher Fose, Grayor, Snatch Bandicoot, NYC Lewis W., Martin Steiner, James Nunn, Vince Gameplays, Hammond Egger, Xdeath, and Marek. Thanks to our patrons for supporting the show, and thank you all for supporting the show. Whether you contribute monetarily or simply listen on a regular basis, I truly do appreciate all of the support. Before we start going once more into the breach with Action 52, I figured it'd be a good idea to let everybody know why we're continuing to talk about Action 52 today, which is literally the 5th episode in a row that we've been talking about Action 52. We started a little over a month ago with the history of Action 52, and then over the course of the past month, we have gone through each chunk, each quarter of games for Action 52. We did 1 through 13, we did 14 through 26, we did 27 through 39, and now today we are doing 40 through 52. I think those are all the right numbers. I may have messed up somewhere there. Regardless, we are going through the final quarter of the games today. So you might be wondering, why are we doing this? Well, it's because we've got to complete it. I want to put Action 52 behind us. This has been a journey. This has been a journey of enlightenment, discovery, and pain over the course of the last month or so. It has been a very interesting experience, and I will let you all in on a little secret. When we started talking about Action 52, I had no intention of having this be literally over a month long worth of discussion. But as we started diving deep into the games of Action 52, I knew that I wanted to do all of them justice, even if they didn't deserve that justice in some situations. I wanted to play everything to completion. I wanted to fully experience everything that Action 52 had to offer because I always heard it was one of the worst games ever, that it was a broken mess. I wanted to feel that for myself. I wanted to experience it for myself. Now I have. Now the question is that a good thing? Well, I guess the jury is still out on that one, but I have experienced all of Action 52. We're going to talk through the final 13 games in the Action 52 collection, and then I will pass my verdict. I will assign my verdict as far as what Pantheon 52, or what Action 52, Pantheon, oh my, could that be a spoiler alert? I don't know. What a Freudian slip. What was that? Oh man, Pantheon 52. Oh, I wonder. You'll have to listen to the whole episode to see how I actually rate this thing. Boy, that was I don't even know if that's a Freudian slip. That's I don't even know what that was. Anyway, we're going to get started talking about our final set of Action 52 games. And we're going to start with Billy Bob. Now, first of all, I have to confess something. When I heard that a game was literally just called Billy Bob, I didn't really know how to feel. I will say that the name Billy Bob does not really, it doesn't really impress me with what could potentially be the focus of the game, because It just sounds like something you would hear way down south, and there's definitely certain negative connotations associated with those kind of Billy Bob kind of things. So I was very curious as I sat down to play this one, what it was actually going to be about. Now, interestingly, Billy Bob is one of the more innovative games in the entire Action 52 collection. We talked last time about how we started to see evolution of the overall game designs included within Action 52 the further we've gotten into it. Last time we talked about a side-scrolling beat-em-up. We talked about different things that were getting added, like the actual ability to get one-ups. And I think we had one-ups last time. I believe we had one-ups last time. Yeah, and there's a lot of different things that were being added over time. There were some platformers that didn't actually suck. The controls and the motion were similar to normal platformers, where you would move around and you would actually jump and move at the same exact time. It was one of those things where we started to see evolution within the Action 52 game catalog. Billy Bob is another example of some additional evolution because Billy Bob is unlike any other game in the entire collection. The way Billy Bob works is it's effectively a pseudo Prince of Persia kind of experience. It's a cinematic platformer, where instead of having a bunch of action, basically what you're doing is you're trying to move through a set of stages. And as you move through those stages, you have to avoid different obstacles, traps, pits, and everything else in order to get to the end or the exit of a given stage. The animations here definitely take inspiration from games like Prince of Persia. We had, and it wasn't out at the point that this came out, but Out of This World or Another World, depending on where you lived in the world. That's another kind of cinematic platformer where the animations, generally speaking, are kind of smooth. There's not really a whole heck of a lot of action, so to speak. It's more about navigating around the environment and having smooth animations and smooth motion and climbing up onto different platforms and all that kind of stuff. Well, Billy Bob is Action 52's version of a cinematic platformer. So let's talk about what exactly that means. In the context of Action 52, what that means is that you're going to be running through a few different stages. As you run through those stages, you have to avoid a few different obstacles. Actually, two obstacles that I personally observed. One is a falling block from the top of the screen. And just the general setting of Billy Bob is it's kind of like an Indiana Jones-ish kind of setting. At least that's what it felt like to me. You're kind of in this temple, cavernous kind of environment, and you've got to run over to the exit of the stage. And there's multiple screens that you have to run through. But as you're running, there are blocks that can fall from the ceiling. There are spears. They're kind of like, I guess they're spears that can also drop from the ceiling. There are also gaps that you have to jump over in order to get from one section of the stage to the next. So those three elements are effectively the main forms of danger within Billy Bob. You're going to run to the side. You're going to try to avoid things that are falling on your head, and you're going to jump across gaps. You're going to try to jump across gaps, because if you don't, you're going to fall to your death, and of course, that's not a good thing. If you move around, you'll feel that the controls here actually do mimic those of a cinematic platformer, and that if you go up to the side of a ledge and you press up, I think it's up. It might be the jump button. No, I think it's up in this one. But anyway, if you get to the edge of a ledge and you kind of go up, you can climb up, and it's a smoothly animated climbing motion, which, just like Prince of Persia, it makes you feel, oh, they actually put some care and attention into this game. When you're running to the side and you jump, you'll see a smoothly animated jump kind of sequence. I was really surprised at how well animated and how well the graphics actually worked in Billy Bob. I was kind of surprised. Now, granted, these are not like super detailed graphics here. I mean, it's still an 8-bit title and it's still an Action 52 title. So temper your expectations, please. But within the context of Action 52, this felt entirely different. It was also incredibly frustrating to play, at least at the beginning, because the way that all the traps work is they spawn randomly on top of you. They spawn randomly up above you. And there are certain areas where you're climbing up to the top of the screen, and then you start running, and an obstacle will spawn literally in front of you. Now, if it's a spear, you can still avoid that if you're continuing to run forward. If it's one of the blocks that fall from the top of the screen, though, You will literally run right into it and then you will die. And just like every other Action 52 game, you have a limited set of lives. There are no checkpoints. And if you lose all your lives, it's game over. There are no continues here. I will say, as I was playing the game, I definitely, the immediate reaction I had was one of frustration. This was a game that just felt too random to really get into. Then I started to keep playing it because I wanted to be able to beat it. And I kept playing it. And I kept playing it. And then eventually, you know what happened? The darn thing grew on me. It grew on me like a fungus because as I was playing it, I started to kind of get used to it the same way as I have a lot of other games. And I started to realize this honestly isn't all that bad of a game. It's kind of interesting. Now, there are supposed to be 5 stages in this game, at least based on the one FAQ that I had read. There's supposed to be 5 stages. The thing is, that did not work with my version of Action 52. There were 2 stages that I was able to progress through, and then the 3rd stage became a different game entirely. And note, I actually mean that literally, because when you get to stage 3 of Billy Bob, it actually switches over to, I think it's the 4th stage of Cheetah Men, which is a really weird thing. Like you're controlling Billy Bob, you're doing this whole cinematic platformer kind of thing, and then suddenly you're a big-ass cheetah trying to walk through a level. I assume that that was not intended because it was just really weird. The thing with Billy Bob is that losing those extra levels of the game actually did rob me of a bit of the experience because in Billy Bob, you actually do have a gun that you can fire. The first 2 stages, there is no reason to fire that gun. My understanding is that there are actually bats that appear in later stages where you can shoot your weapon to try to hit them. I also understand that the stages get a little bit more challenging as you go. Now, the question is, would that challenge have been would the challenge have been well designed? I can't speak from personal experience because, like I said, my version of the game had a skip that went right at the end of level 2 all the way to level 4 of Cheetah Men. So Billy Bob kind of disappeared off the radar. I don't know if I'm disappointed by that fact because the little bit that I played of the game, it actually was kind of okay. I mean, it wasn't great. And the developers really like putting jumps on the very next screen. Like you'd have no way of knowing that there was a gap there as you're running from left to right. And it works just like games like Out of This World or Prince of Persia, where you get to the edge of the screen, you go into the next screen, and then it just kind of paints the new screen on the screen. That's a lot of screens. But what happens is a lot of times there is a gap immediately following a screen transition, which if you didn't know it existed, you're just going to drop. So a lot of times what you have to do is you actually have to jump from the edge of the one screen. And then when you land on the other screen, you're actually going to be in the air and then you land on the other side of whatever gap might be there. After you get used to that overall design, you'll start just doing that out of just sheer muscle memory. And eventually you will get used to this game and you're kind of maybe going to have a little bit of fun with it. Now, it did take a few hours, and I know 2 levels, a few hours to get through. It's because of all the randomness. It's because of the randomness of the spawns above you. And when the things just fall, especially the blocks are horrible. The spears, you can kind of get around, you can run under them, and if you run fast enough, they won't actually hit you. But the blocks, they will hit you, they will kill you, they will ruin your day, especially if they spawn right as you're in the middle of a jump, or as you're running forward. You literally have no opportunity to react to anything like that. So at that point, you're going to lose a life. You're going to have to restart whatever level that you're on, which I got to say does kind of suck. But once you get used to it, and once you kind of understand how to move through each of the levels to both maximize your overall forward progress, but not push it too quick, because if you go too quickly, that's when you open yourself up to some of those random spawns. If you take it a little bit slower, you can kind of sort of see them and avoid them. There are a couple of tricky platforming sections as well, especially in stage 2, where there are some ledges that you have to kind of like jump kind of thing, where you land and then you have to jump right away. And I got to tell you, the controls allow for that. The controls here work fine for a cinematic platforming kind of experience. So Billy Bob surprised me. This is one of the better games and one of the more innovative games in the entire collection. So we're starting off on a really high note with our final quarter of the Action 52 experiences. Billy Bob, I've got to say, I kind of enjoyed playing. Moving on to our next game on the list, we have City of Doom, which is a vertically scrolling Spider-Man simulator. And the reason I call it a Spider-Man simulator is not because you're shooting a bunch of webs and swinging all around, but City of Doom, your goal is to climb up the side of a building. Why are you climbing up the side of a building? Who the heck knows? This is just a game. But you're climbing up the side of a building and you have to avoid different enemies that will spawn and occasionally try to fly right at you. And you do have the ability to throw stuff at them, to shoot something at them, to try to defeat them. But there are some enemies that are going to move around really randomly. And if they move too randomly in your general direction, it definitely is going to be a situation where you could get hit. And then that's not a good thing because you lose a life and then you got to restart and all that kind of stuff. As you're climbing up the buildings, and there's 3 different stages that you have to progress through, each of which is a different building, ostensibly. And then you climb up, you get to the top, you have to fight a boss at the top of each stage. You beat the boss, you move on to the next stage. If you do that through the 3 stages that you have available, the game will repeat itself just like many of the Action 52 games do. The thing is that this actually has a fairly interesting concept. It's basically a vertically scrolling shooter. But because it added in the ability for you to be actually climbing the building a la Spider-Man, it felt different. And you control the pace of your climb. So you can either go quickly or you can go not so quickly. Now, the one thing I do want to point out, because first of all, just recognize that this is not the kind of game that would stand alone if it wasn't in Action 52. But as an Action 52 game, I think it does have an interesting concept. The one thing that I really want to call attention to that I think is absolutely brutally wrong is the fact that if you accidentally collide with a windowsill, because as you're climbing up the building, just like many buildings do, they have windows and they may have windowsills. Well, if you hit one of those windowsills, meaning you just move into them or you move too far to the side or whatever, it kills you. And I don't understand why that is. Maybe it's because the people inside of the apartments or rooms or whatever, they see this freak outside their house and they get all freaked out or something. I don't know. I don't know what the in-game purpose is for why you would die if you accidentally touch a windowsill or a window. But there you go. That's the game. It's just the way it's designed. As far as progressing through the game, I found that you can kind of get in a sweet spot where if you position yourself fairly close to the edge of a window and just climb straight up, a lot of times the various enemies or different objects that are being dropped on you will miss you. You still have to keep firing repeatedly because that's just the way you play any of these games, and you want to get the drop on whatever enemy or object might be falling towards you or might be flying at you. But you kind of can progress okay-ish. There are some times where enemies will move and it'll be that random pattern I was talking about. So it might start at the left of the screen and then zigzag over to the right and then go right down at you. And sometimes those are going to be unavoidable kinds of damage. But if you take it a little bit slowly when you see one of those enemies pop up, generally speaking, you can avoid where those enemies come into contact with you. You can try to avoid where those enemies are going, especially if you play the game more and more. You'll eventually understand what those different mechanics are, what the different movement patterns are for each of those enemies, and you'll be able to avoid them fairly well. This is a game that doesn't take all that long to beat. I mean, it takes a little bit of time to get used to the overall controls and what you're supposed to do and making sure that you don't accidentally hit a windowsill, which causes instant death. But otherwise, I mean, it wasn't, I'm struggling with this one because it wasn't great. But I liked the concept. I liked the concept of scaling a building, kind of like a Spider-Man kind of thing. I mean, there was no Spider-Man element here, but I kind of liked the concept. It's just the design and the implementation was kind of crappy. This is one I feel like could have been improved. I feel like this is one that you could do a modern day improvement kind of thing, similar to what Fat Hippo was doing with Illuminator. And I feel like you could improve this one to make it kind of a fun, short arcade-like experience where it's not going to be a super deep game. But I mean, you could have multiple levels, you can get to different spots, or maybe there's like an endless mode where you keep going up the building and you try to get as high of a floor as possible. Like there's different ways you can reimagine this, and it could actually be something that's not all that bad. As it stands, the Action 52 version, kind of crappy in terms of how it was designed, but I can certainly see the potential appeal of this one. Here's another one 2 for 2. Not so bad games, starting out our final set of Action 52 experiences. Then we move on to Bits and Pieces, which this is another one that I actually didn't mind. This is what I would consider a side-scrolling jump-a-thon, because you can't fire projectiles, you can't do anything like that. All you're going to do is move from left to right, and you're going to jump. And you're going to jump over the enemies that attempt to run into you. And enemies may come from the left or the right, so you do have to be cognizant of enemies from behind you, approaching you. You have to be cognizant of groups of enemies that may be coming at you from the front, and you've got to jump over all of them. I found this one interesting for a few different reasons. Number one, the main character, the character that you play, I'm going to tell you right now, it has to be the Count from Sesame Street. Try to play this game, look at the graphics, and you tell me that it's not the Count from Sesame Street. You guys know the Count, right? It's like 1 bad game, 2 bad game, 3 bad game, you know, that guy. It has to be the Count from Sesame Street because it just looks just like him. I even called my daughter over and I said, hey, that's the Count, right? And she said, yeah, that's the Count. And I said, wow, I knew it. I knew it was. Anyway, I thought it was interesting that you basically play as at least in my headcanon, you're playing as the Count, and it kind of makes sort of sense because you're walking through a graveyard and it's kind of, I guess it's meant to be a little spooky. It's really not spooky. The first 2 stages of the game are pretty much the same, meaning that the level design doesn't really differ. The enemy layout might change a little bit, or the enemy pattern as far as like when enemies spawn and how they come at you. I feel like it's mostly random to begin with anyway, but the first 2 stages are pretty much the same. The third stage actually adds green grass. Most of the game, the first 2 stages, it's just totally like gray, totally gray, except for the characters. The characters have some color, but for the most part, the graveyard environment is just like a black and white kind of scene. Well, the third stage changes the ground to be grass, and I gotta tell you, it's surprising to me how much of a difference that color change made to how it feels to play the game. Going from what was purely a black and white kind of experience to now having some color, and a lot of color on the screen because the ground is a huge chunk of the overall visible space in the game, it made it feel almost vibrant. And it had to be a psychological thing. And I'm assuming it's because the rest of the game was just black and white, but getting to that third stage and seeing grass on the ground, it just made things feel different. It made it feel better for some reason. Now, this game is not what I would consider a deep experience. Like I said, all you're doing is moving from left to right and you're jumping over enemies. So it's not really all that deep, but it's honestly not horrible. There's just not a lot here. This is the kind of game where if there were just a ton of these kind of games included in Action 52, it would simply be looked at as a half-hearted experience, but not necessarily a bad or a horrible experience. It would just be one of those things where it's like, okay, developers put minimal effort into this one, but it wouldn't be horrible. So it's kind of interesting to me. And granted, I am talking once again, please keep this in mind for all of our discussions. I am talking about this relative to the rest of Action 52. You should never look, if Bits and Pieces with its 3 stages were ever released as a standalone title, there is no reason why anybody should ever buy and play this game. But within the context of Action 52 and all of the other crap or at least a lot of the other crap that was included here, it kind of stands out as something that is really not all that bad. It's just not really deep. There's not much there. There's 3 stages. You're going to get through them really quickly. All you have to do is take your time a little bit, make sure you jump at the right time. You're going to get through these stages without too much of a challenge. But other than that, I mean, it's just there, but it's not horrible. So I kind of sort of don't mind Bits and Pieces. Moving on, though, to our next game, and one that I do actually mind, is a game called Beeps and Blips. This is a single-screen space shooter where you can shoot in any one of 4 different directions, either up, down, left, or right, depending on what the last direction was that you had pressed on your D-pad. And just like most of the other space shooters that are included here, enemies will spawn, and your goal is to defeat them. Interestingly, this game does also include a one-up system, similar to what we talked about in our last episode, where some games were starting to introduce the concept of one-ups. Also interesting is that in Beeps and Blips, one-ups are not actually one-ups. They're actually shields that get applied to your ship. And I believe you can have a maximum of 4 shields, because the way it works is you pick up a one-up and then a little dot will appear on the side, on one side of your ship, and your ship is basically just a square. So there's really not much there at all. So you'll go there, you'll pick up a one-up, and then you have a little shield that appears on the side of your ship. Those one-ups effectively give you some hit points to use as you continue to move through this game and defeat other enemies. It is a semi-novel concept. This is something that the game has not tried before in terms of an actual replenishable health system, which, once again, another innovation that's getting included now. You basically have some way to actually replenish your health. None of the other games in Action 52 have anything like this. And granted, this is super simple, but it still shows some evolution beyond what we've talked through so far. And for the first 3 stages of the game, it's kind of fun to play. I cannot believe it's gotta be. Listen, I have gotta be, this has gotta be the result of my own internal wiring getting completely distorted because of all of the Action 52 I've been playing. Because honestly, the first 3 stages of the game weren't really all that bad. But then you get to stage 4, which introduces heat-seeking enemies of destruction, and then the game becomes a complete mess to play because the game becomes so artificially challenging. And by that, I mean that whether you lose or win, or whether you survive or die, is dependent entirely upon random chance. Just like so many of the other games within Action 52, the random number generation included here can border on simply unfair. There is no reason why a game should ever have it where an enemy spawns directly on you, the player, and then kills you, because there's no way for you to avoid that kind of hit. There's no amount of skill that you could possibly achieve, no skill level you could possibly achieve that could avoid that kind of scenario. It's just one of those things where it should be the simplest thing in the world to basically say, well, maybe not the simplest thing, but as a game designer, you should be able to tell where your player character is, and you should be able to make it so that enemies don't spawn directly on top of that player character. And you don't want to spawn them right next to the character either. But I mean, there's got to be some design paradigms here that are just totally being disregarded because Action 52 is Action 52. But the thing is, it creates such a situation where it's just supreme frustration because, like I said, it's not a test of your skill. It is literally a test of your luck, and not in a good way. This is one of those kind of experiences that just makes you super frustrated to play. And even beyond the insane difficulty, once you get up to around that stage 4-ish, stage 5-ish kind of level, you'll start to find enemies that you literally can't shoot with your guns. Or, at a minimum, you have to shoot them in like the most pixel-perfect spot in order to defeat them. Though interestingly, and something we didn't talk about yet today, but we have talked about on prior episodes talking about Action 52, any sprite that's on the screen will take up a spawn spot for a potential enemy or for a potential power-up, in this case, one-ups, which means if you have a bunch of non-killable enemies on the screen, there's going to be situations where you may not even be able to do anything to take them out, and you could potentially become stuck. Now, some of the enemies that are basically unhittable do have a sweet spot where and it's got to be maybe a pixel wide, where if your projectile hits just that right spot, the enemy will get destroyed, and then you'll be able to continue playing the game. Other enemies, you might be able to get a one-up and then crash into them, and then the actual act of crashing your ship into them will defeat them. So I guess that's an option for dealing with some of them. It's not a great option, but I mean, it is an option. But then there are some enemies super late in the game where you literally can't collide with them and you can't shoot them. I don't understand what purpose they serve other than to take up screen real estate and to take up a spawn spot from an otherwise and potentially very deadly enemy, because it's not like the other enemies in the game are simple to deal with. Once you get up to the later stages, it's a pain to deal with and super, super frustrating. But it's also frustrating to have enemies that you can literally fly right over and you can't collide with them. Your bullets can't collide with them. They just kind of float there in space. And I don't know what their purpose is. All I know is that it makes the game just feel like an unfinished mess. And speaking of unfinished, you will eventually make it to stage 8 if you're absolutely crazy or you abuse save states. And that is where the game absolutely breaks. Not because of the unfair difficulty we've been talking about, but because the game literally breaks. The game gets all glitchy with the graphics. You can't tell what the heck's going on. At this point, there is nothing more to see with this game. Overall, I think there could have been some light fun here. And like I said, the earlier stages of the game kinda sorta were semi-fun. As it stands though, this one is an absolute mess. And then it becomes a broken mess once you get to stage 8. So basically, if you're going to play this one, play the first 2 or 3 stages or so, and then consider yourself content, because going past that is just an exercise in frustration and futility. Moving on to our next game, we have Manchester Beat, which is another side-scrolling action platforming experience. This one returns to the old style of Action 52 platforming action, where controls are absolutely abysmal and can't accept more than one button press at a time. And I've gotta wonder, once again, why are certain platforming titles designed like this, and why are some other platforming titles designed like a normal traditional platforming title? I honestly don't know the answer to that question, but it is something that continues to intrigue me nonetheless. With Manchester Beat, you have to progress through 3 different stages, each of which features a boss at the end that flies around on the screen in a very predictable pattern. The thing with Manchester Beat is that it's just a soulless experience from beginning to end, and honestly, it's about as poorly designed as any platformer that you're going to see on the Action 52 cartridge. There are occasions, just as an example, there are occasions where you can walk right through obstacles, meaning there might be a block in front of you, and sometimes the game decides you're not going to collide with that, so you can literally walk right through that block. Oh, and there is actually a cool trick included with this game. If you walk off the side of a pit, and with enough forward momentum, you can walk through the ground in front of you, which allows you to bypass most of the levels in the game without any real danger. Now, I will say that if you do that, the game becomes literally just the act of walking from left to right. So you lose all challenge, you lose all aspects of what the game is actually designed or how the actual game is designed. So I don't recommend that you do that, at least at first. I mean, eventually, you may just want to see what the rest of the game looks like, so you may just decide, hey, I'm going to walk through some walls and I'm going to see what happens. I mean, it's not like you're entering a cheat code. This is just the way the game is designed. So you just walk through the ground, you get up to the boss, you jump up from the ground, and by the way, with the boss fight, the way the boss flies around, like I said, it's a very predictable pattern because it literally doesn't change, but there are only a few spots on the screen that you can actually stand in and be semi-safe. If you are just off by a pixel, the boss will collide with you and will kill you. So this is one of those kinds of experiences where there's a lot of trial and error until you figure out how to defeat the boss and where to stand. And the interesting thing is that where you have to stand in order to be safe and actually hit the boss, you're not actually colliding with the boss, like your fists aren't colliding with the boss. It's just kind of close-ish. It's like a pantomime kind of thing. It's really, really weird. And if you are playing the game the way the designers intended, meaning not walking through walls, as you're kind of platforming around and defeating other enemies, sometimes there's just a stray ball of fire that simply spawns and gets in your way, which you need to avoid. Which honestly can be easier said than done because a lot of times those fireballs are placed in very difficult to avoid spots. So I don't know. I mean, this one just feels awful. I mean, if I'm taking off my rose-colored glasses, which honestly, I've been wearing some rose-colored glasses for the first few games we've been talking about. If I take those off and look at Manchester Beat the way it needs to be looked at, it's just a bad game. I mean, this one is soulless. There is nothing really redeeming about it. There's nothing particularly interesting about it. I would not play this game. I don't think you should play this game. This is one of those that I would not recommend you even try because there's nothing here. There is nothing good here. It's pretty darn awful. And honestly, I would just avoid this one. This is not worth your time. Moving on to our next game, we have Boss, which is a side-scrolling on-foot shooter where you need to walk from left to right, as you typically do, avoiding objects dropped from above you while shooting various enemies that may spawn in front of you, who can occasionally shoot you as well, which sometimes sucks. This features 6 stages of mostly incompetent game design. And the way you can think of Boss is that even though there are 6 stages, there are really only 2 stages that kinda sorta repeat and just have their difficulty bumped up each time you get to them. One stage is a street-based stage where you're moving from left to right. You have to avoid objects that are being dropped from above you out of windows and buildings and stuff like that, and you have to defeat any enemy that you might come across as you're moving through the stage. The second type of stage is kind of in a warehouse kind of setting, and you move through that stage, and once again you have enemies on the ground, and you also have enemies above you that supposedly will throw stuff at you. The thing is that hardly ever happens. From my perspective, at least as I was moving through the warehouse stages, I don't remember ever coming into contact with any objects dropped from above me, even though as you're walking through the stages, there are definitely enemies above you, and they're kind of the background is kind of shaking where those enemies are, and you're just waiting. You're like, oh, something's going to fall. And as long as you keep moving forward, nothing ever falls. So I don't know how to feel about that. I will say though, that the warehouse stages are ridiculously easy. Oh, by the way, there's a boss at the end of each stage. It's the same exact boss every single stage. All you have to do is get all the way to the left-hand side of the screen, and then you just shoot it constantly, and you really can't die. I don't think there's a way to die on the boss as long as you're at the far left-hand side of the screen. If you're not on the far left-hand side of the screen, you will almost certainly die. So it's not like this is a super cool trick. It's like the only strategy that allows you to survive. But every single stage has that same exact boss. The warehouse stages are really simple, and those are the even stages. So like stage 2, 4, and 6, those are warehouse stages. Stages 1, 3, and 5 are street stages. The street stages are incredibly challenging because as you're moving from left to right, the enemies that are above you actually do throw objects down at you. And you have to time it so that as you're walking through the stage, you avoid those obstacles or those objects that are falling at you. Because if you get hit, obviously you're going to lose a life. You're going to have to restart from the beginning of the stage, and nobody wants that. If the game were designed that the objects were falling from a certain height, then I'd say, okay, well, it's something you just have to kind of time your walks to avoid. But there are some windows on the buildings where things are being thrown down at you from that are basically right above your head. And those are really tricky to time. And the way it works is there's this kind of like this hand that's pulsating by the window. And sometimes it'll drop a bomb. I think it's a bomb. Sometimes it'll drop a bomb, and other times it'll just kind of pulsate, but it won't drop a bomb. So it's kind of random. So you don't know when it's actually safe to move beyond those obstacles. Like I said, for some of them that are higher up on buildings where you have a little bit of space between when the projectile is dropped and when you move from left to right, it's not so bad. But there are a couple of areas where it's literally right above your head, and if you make the wrong choice, you're going to die. And as you go further in the game, the speed of all of the enemies, both the on-foot enemies as well as the dropped projectiles, they increase, which means by the time you get to stage 5 of the street stages, it's pretty darn challenging to get through without making a mistake and ultimately dying. The warehouse stages really don't have that issue at all. Those are pretty darn simple, but the street stages really kind of suck. This one is just, man, it could have been. Now, you know what? No, this couldn't have been anything. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it at the end of the day. And the fact is that there are even some times where you get up to where the boss is supposed to be and the boss never spawns at all, which means you've just wasted your time. You can't do anything. You either have to kill yourself if there's still an enemy on the screen that allows you to do that, or you have to reset the entire game, which if that happens very late in the game, man, that would be a super frustrating thing to deal with. This is another one of those games where because it kind of sort of cheats, I decided I'm going to cheat right back. So because bosses sometimes don't show up, I save stated here. I absolutely used save states because I didn't want to get up to the boss area of stage 6 and then have the boss not show up and have to replay this god-awful experience from the very beginning just because the game decided that the boss isn't going to show up. I don't have time for that kind of crappy design. I mean, that kind of bug would just be ridiculous to have to deal with. So I decided I'm just not going to worry about it. Overall, though, this is just one incompetently designed experience, and it is totally not fun. It's really more irritating than purely broken, even though the boss kind of thing is an example of something being purely broken. But at the end of the day, this one's just irritating. There's some artificial challenge. It kind of speaks to the overall lack of design prowess that the individuals who made this game have or lacked, because it's just there. And the levels are not designed well. The enemy placements really are not great. It's just designed to punish you. And while you can get good enough in order to actually beat the game, this is not one that I would spend time. I did spend time. I wouldn't have you spend your time on this. Don't do what I did. Learn from my mistakes and just pass this one by. It is definitely not worth it. Moving on to our next game, we have Dedant. Dedant, D-E-D-A-N-T. I'm not sure how you would pronounce that. I'm going to say Dedant or Dedant. Maybe Dedant. Given the fact that you're going to die a bunch in this game, maybe it is Dedant, because this is a single screen vertical shooter, very similar to Shooting Gallery, which we talked about last time, where you're basically trapped or stuck at the very bottom of the screen, and then a bunch of enemies spawn above you, and you've got to position yourself at the right spot in order to shoot those enemies and defeat them before they can defeat you. The interesting thing about this game is that rather than being in a shooting gallery with random objects appearing, in here you play as an ant. And because, of course, Action 52 is not subtle, all of your enemies are other insectoid kinds of creatures like ants and beetles and spiders and all that kind of stuff. There is an interesting twist added to the overall shooter formula within Action 52, though, in that although you're stuck at the bottom of the screen, you can actually scroll to the left or the right and appear on the other side of the screen. Kind of like a Pac-Man kind of maze setup, where if you go off the right-hand side of the screen, you reappear on the left-hand side of the screen. Or vice versa, you go off the left-hand side of the screen, you reappear on the right-hand side of the screen. So there is a little bit of innovation here beyond some of the other single-screen shooters that we've seen so far. As you play the game, various enemies will spawn and will try to attack you. And each of those enemies have their own mechanics and movement patterns, with some even having the ability to fire projectiles at you, which does amp up the challenge considerably. On the surface, at its face value, this sounds like it's an innovative Action 52 shooter. Only I can safely say that I kinda despised this one. Even though it had a similar kind of structure as Shooting Gallery, I felt that this one was just designed way worse than what Shooting Gallery was. This one has a similar structure as many other Action 52 games. You need to progress through 5 stages, and in order to get from one stage to the next, you need to kill a certain number of enemies in each stage before progressing to the next stage. The issue is that later stages can become absolutely insane in terms of enemies charging at you. And once they get down to your level, they will often move back and forth around the horizontal plane where you're trapped on the screen. And they can shoot projectiles at you while you're down there too, which makes it so that you're effectively trapped. You have to either wait for those enemies to move away from you, or you're going to have to take the death. And actually, I take that back. There is a trick here, which honestly, I feel a little scummy using, because I know it's not the way we're supposed to play the game, but the game is just designed unfairly. So I did utilize this trick. So the way it works is, remember how I said you can move from the right-hand side of the screen, you reappear on the left and vice versa? Well, if you straddle the two sides of the screen, meaning you move just far enough to the right where you kind of see part of your body appear on the left and part of your body appear on the right-hand side of the screen. If you're in that location, any enemies that charge at you or any projectiles that get fired at you, they can't hit you. Now, you might think that this is cheating. Maybe. I don't know. Let me put it this way. There are some enemy types in Dedant that you can't avoid at all. And I'm speaking primarily about the spiders. The way spiders work is when they spawn, they will charge directly at you. And once they get down to your horizontal level, there's nothing you can do with them. So you either have to shoot them before they get to you, or you're going to have to take the death, which really sucks, especially because it's not like you're only dealing with 1 or 2 enemies at a time. When you get to the later stages, there's a ton of enemies coming at you. There might be other enemies that are already on that horizontal plane with you, which makes you trapped. And if a spider is coming right at you, there is literally nothing you can do to avoid it other than standing in between the screens. When you do that, the spider will try to charge you. It'll basically not be able to get to you, and it will disappear from reality. It literally just disappears. In which case, I guess that's a small win for you, because there's no longer a spider trying to eat your brains. But it's just, I don't know. I mean, I don't like using those kind of cheap tactics in order to progress in a game, but the way the game is designed is so unfair to just the human player that it's kind of sort of necessary. I can justify and I can rationalize why doing this kind of thing is actually okay in this game, because if you actually play this, and I don't suggest you do, but if you actually play this, you'll see what I'm talking about. It is just an unfair experience. It's one of those designs that is so, you got to be really lucky in order to actually win this one, or you have to be supremely patient because you got to wait for the right moment to move out from the side of the screen, maybe take a couple shots, move back to the side of the screen. Eventually, if you do that, you will get through the game as long as you play really safely. If you're trying to play this game like a normal game, there's no way you're beating this, because there's going to either be a mistake that you make or there's going to be some enemy motion that happens that's just going to ruin your night. So I would avoid this one. It really wasn't fun for me. If you do beat the 5th stage, you'd get a game over screen. So this is actually one of the few games that doesn't just endlessly cycle its levels. There is a true ending, even though you don't get an actual ending sequence kind of thing. So I really didn't like this one. I understand, based on reading other people's inputs, that some people consider this one of the better shooters in Action 52. And I've got to tell you that that classification just boggles my mind. Did it have some innovative ideas? Well, sure, it did. But was it fun to play? Not a chance. I really didn't like this one. I spent a good chunk of time playing it. I just didn't like it. And I don't think you're going to either. But of course, play the game, form your own opinions if you feel so inclined. I'm just going to tell you right now, Dead Ant was not one of my favorite games here. Moving on to our next game, we have Hambo's Adventures, which is a Donkey Kong-like single-screen platformer where you need to climb from the bottom of a stage to reach an exit at the top of the stage. This conceptually is legitimately a great idea. Just picture a game where you need to get from one section of a stage to the next, all the while avoiding enemies with unique patterns, interesting placements, and some tricky gaps to traverse. Well, I guess you don't need to picture that game as like an imaginary thing, because you should just go play Donkey Kong, because that's basically what that game is. And if Hambo's Adventures was designed as well as Donkey Kong, I'd be saying this is a great game and you should all go play it. But, of course, this is Action 52, which means Hambo's Adventures is not Donkey Kong. It is very far from a Donkey Kong kind of experience. It is structurally similar because, like I mentioned, you have to get from the bottom of stage to the top of the stage. And to do that, you have to climb ladders, you've got to jump over various enemies, you've got to avoid getting hit, and you've got to make it to the exit of a stage. So structurally, very similar to Donkey Kong. The thing is, though, everything else about the game, other than the framework and structure, absolutely sucks. The controls are the same crappy platform controls that so many Action 52 titles utilize. The enemies will spawn out of thin air, sometimes right on top of you, killing you in the process. There's other times where the enemies spawn just anywhere, because the enemies do spawn randomly here. And basically, your overall success or failure, your chance of success or failure, is based almost entirely on luck. Getting through this game is a total chore. You only get one life. Yes, one life to get through 10 stages. Luckily, the game will occasionally spawn 1-ups, which can help. Unluckily though, each stage is so random that there's no guarantee that you will ever beat it, despite your own skill at the game. The random nature of enemy spawns makes it increasingly frustrating to play, especially in later stages where the enemies move so quickly and spawn so randomly, and the platforms are not necessarily all that wide. You get into a situation where you just have mega frustration, and there's going to be some sections of stages where you're going to have to get super lucky in order to get past them. And occasionally you do get lucky and the game isn't frustrating at all because enemies don't spawn in your path and you simply waltz through a stage, jump over a single bad guy and maybe a gap or two, climb some ladders, and then you're on your way. I actually think that there's potential gold in making a Donkey Kong styled modern platformer where you can't attack enemies but can only move from point A to point B. And note, I'm not talking about some of the crazy platformers out there that roughly resemble this description, like Super Meat Boy or others like that. I'm talking about a more casual, though still somewhat challenging platforming experience where avoidance rather than combat is the name of the game. Hambro's Adventure is not that game. But it did make me start thinking about how such a game could be improved, and that, at a minimum, was an interesting thought exercise. Overall, this one was not a bad concept, it was just really poor execution. Moving on to our next game on the list, we have Time Warp Tickers. This is a side-scrolling platformer, sort of. You move from left to right as you do with many platforming games, only in this one you play as a pair of fingers, I think, and you need to avoid and defeat enemies spawning from both ahead and behind you. Some of those enemies will spawn in a way that makes it so jumping is the only course of action, since they may spawn a little bit too high for you to actually hit them, because in this game you don't have projectiles, you only have a melee attack. So if an enemy spawns just a little bit too high from where you can flick them with your finger, you will not be able to attack those enemies and you will effectively be dead unless you can jump over those enemies in time. This game is absolutely atrocious. This is one of my least favorite experiences in Action 52. From the stage design, to the character design, to the music, to the overall controls and gameplay, this one just was completely one of my least favorite experiences. It wasn't outright broken. It wasn't a complete train wreck of a design, it was just a slog to play, and the enemy spawns made the game frustrating with no potential payoff or reward. Luckily, this one only has 2 stages before the game repeats itself, but seriously, it is not worth it in the least, and something I feel that I never need to touch again. I will never play this game again. I kinda hated it. That's really all there is to say about this one. I legit kinda hated it in many, many ways, with almost a burning passion. You know what? With a slightly heated passion, I hated this one. Our next game on the list is Jigsaw, which is another side-scroller, where you play as a dude with a nail gun whose tools have turned against him. And you need to make your way from left to right, defeating those tools along the way, and hopefully reaching the end of each stage. This one was designed incompetently, but wasn't a total disaster. It had the same wonky platforming controls because Action 52 is Action 52, so wonky platforming controls are almost given when you talk about Action 52 games. And by this point, I personally was used to how these games controlled, so I didn't really have an issue with it here. Normal people may not like it if you sit down and you haven't kind of immersed yourself with Action 52 gameplay, but my brain at this point has been so rewired that I just feel like this is the new normal, which kind of sucks for me. But as long as you take each stage slowly, even if you're not super familiar with the controls, you can probably pick it up without too much difficulty. And if you take each stage slowly, you can make your way through the stages. You do need to be careful though, because occasionally enemies will simply decide they're not going to, what is the word? They're not going to honor the rules of the game. There may be a block in their way. There may be something that is a collidable object. And the enemy says, guess what? I'm not going to think about that. I'm just going to run right through it and run right at you. When that happens, it can be very random And you're going to need to have some quick reflexes, or you're going to have to restart the stage you're on. Because remember, there are no checkpoints in Action 52. So if you take any sort of damage, you will have to restart the level that you're playing. And because enemies can randomly decide they're not going to honor the rules of physics within the game engine, there's going to be times where you take a very cheap death and it's going to be really, really frustrating. If you play it carefully, though, I do believe you'll be able to get through this without too much difficulty. Although I will say, first of all, there are 3 stages here, by the way. And I will say that in the second stage, there is a particularly nasty trap involving a very tight jump over an unhittable enemy, after which another enemy charges at you as soon as you land. From my perspective, this is kind of like a virtual middle finger from the developers to the player. And I can't say that I was happy with that gesture. Other than that, though, most of the rest of the game you can progress through if you take your time, you shoot whenever you can, and you kind of hang back to avoid any enemies that might be running at you through an obstacle. Was this the worst platformer here? No, it really wasn't. It's just a subpar experience overall with some frustrating game design misses. It really wasn't the worst, but why bother? Why spend your time playing this when you can spend your time playing any other number of platformers that don't absolutely suck? So overall, this one, Jigsaw, wasn't so bad. Interestingly, by the way, and we haven't talked a lot about this, but if you ever look at the Action 52 manual, and this is something that I have done, if you look at the Action 52 manual, it includes descriptions for each of these games. And if you read the description for Jigsaw, it's actually described as though it's a puzzle kind of experience. Well, I got to tell you, something got lost in translation because it was not a puzzle experience. This was all about just fighting tools. It felt like a knockoff of Home Improvement. There is actually a licensed Home Improvement game, which supposedly is not all that bad. I've never played it. Actually, I know this is a little bit of a tangent. There is a licensed Home Improvement game. Home Improvement was a sitcom from the 90s starring Tim the Toolman Taylor, like with the tools and, more power, all that kind of stuff. But they actually made a licensed video game about that. And you might wonder, well, how can you make a licensed video game out of that? Apparently it's like totally crazy and you do some time travel. I think there's a stage where you fight dinosaurs. I have no idea what drugs those developers were doing when they made that game, but I mentioned that just to say that because of the overall concept here where you're fighting different power tools, it kind of sort of felt like a pseudo Home Improvement kind of game. I don't know. It wasn't the worst thing, but it certainly wasn't worth your time either. Moving on to our next game, we have Ninja Assault, which is a ninja action platformer. And I am going to say this right up front. This is by far my favorite Action 52 game. And this is the most innovative title on the entire cartridge. I'm not even joking with this. This is my favorite game on the entire cartridge. There are 4 total stages, and each one is a little bit different. Your first stage is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, which is vastly superior to our last beat-em-up from last episode, which was called Slashers. In Ninja Assault, you need to face a variety of ninjas and animals as you make your way from left to right. You can jump and attack using your weapons, and each enemy will take multiple hits to defeat and actually show some sort of reaction and knockback when they get hit. Unlike Slashers, which was entirely random and just felt like you're mashing a button, in Ninja Assault, it's not like that at all. Ninja Assault, it actually feels like you're playing a beat-em-up game, and honestly, it's not so bad. You do have a life bar here, and you can get hit several times before you die, though most likely any hits that you take will come from the occasional animal that spawns as opposed to ninjas, because defeating ninjas is super easy in this game. The animals that spawn will sometimes charge right at you, which can make timing your hit a little bit tricky given their speed because they move pretty darn quickly. The cool thing here, though, is that enemy spawns are not random, which means just like so many other real action platforming games, you can actually learn the level here and progress further based on skill rather than random luck. If you do get past stage 1, you get to stage 2, which is a one-on-one fight against a ninja master. It's basically a boss fight kind of thing. There's really nothing to write home about it, but I did think it was interesting that the second stage was purely a boss fight. If you beat them, you get to stage 3, which is a side-scrolling platforming level where you need to make your way from one log to another in a river. And as you're doing that, you'll notice that different logs start to flash, and basically that means they're going to start rolling around. And if a log is rolling and you're on it, it means instant death. So this is effectively a timing-based platforming challenge included in stage 3. I will say that this level kinda sucks, but I do get what the designers were going for. The issue is, the level looks like it has depth, meaning it looks like each of the logs you can kind of move into or out of the screen in order to land on. But in reality, the game is designed with 3 different platform heights, which creates an odd disconnect in your brain. Because it's not really depth. Even though the visual design is depth, the actual gameplay doesn't have depth included in the overall experience. I will say, this is the worst part of the game, and it will require extensive trial and error to get through. If you get past stage 3, you will make it to stage 4, which legitimately reminds me of a super simple Ninja Gaiden styled level, where you need to jump from platform to platform as birds occasionally spawn and attempt to kill you. At least I think they're birds, because by the time you get to stage 4, all of the sprite graphics in the stage are totally distorted. You know the Pixar movie Inside Out, where the main characters are kind of like the different emotions within a young girl, and the main characters, those emotions are walking through different areas inside. The main character, the girl's name is Riley. So they're walking through Riley's kind of internal psyche, so to speak, and they go into one area of Riley's imagination where they devolve into abstract designs where they don't really resemble themselves all that much. And they're kind of made out of primitive shapes and all that kind of stuff. That's what the sprite graphics look like in stage 4 of Ninja Assault. Even with that though, it's kind of fun to play. Even though your character no longer looks like a ninja, it still controls decently, it's not too challenging, and it features a boss fight at the end against, well, something. I'm not really sure what that something was, but it was still a cool fight. That boss, by the way, was guarding a cave, which I assume would have led to stage 5, if the game was actually complete. As it stands, once you beat the boss, the game simply ends because you can't progress any further. You simply need to reset the cartridge to get out of the game because there's nothing more you can do here. I've got to say, I loved this game, at least within the context of Action 52. Outside of Action 52, this game has some serious flaws, but relative to other Action 52 experiences, this is a freaking Pantheon entry all the way. I really think, and I'm not being facetious, I really think you should play this one. This one feels the closest to a real game that you're going to find in Action 52. If you play Ninja Assault and you walk away saying, I can't stand this experience, do not play the rest of Action 52 because it's going to knock you out. But Ninja Assault, legitimately, not that bad. It's my favorite, by far, my favorite game in the entire Action 52 collection. If you want the best of what Action 52 has to offer, play this game. Moving on to our next game, we have Robbie and the Robots, which is another side-scrolling action platformer. Only this time you play as a Duke Nukem wannabe who has seemingly enjoyed a few too many Las Vegas buffets. Or I think the manual says you play as a robot, but literally it looks like Duke Nukem, but like he let himself go a little bit, and he's just running from one side of the screen to the next. That's what it looked like to me. You guys can all form your own opinions. As you play the game, you'll notice that you can fire projectiles as fast as you can press your controller button. And all you got to do is move from left to right in 6 different stages of Action 52 goodness. I will admit that this is an odd one to talk through because this game is wildly uneven. It features several different enemies that can spawn or not spawn depending on how they feel, which are easy enough to deal with if they do decide to show up. But the game also features static enemy turrets that fire relentlessly at you, as long as the game believes it has enough memory to display projectiles on the screen. These turrets absolutely suck, and will make any section of a stage with jumping and less shooting an intensely frustrating experience. These turrets will shoot you, and you will almost be able to do nothing to avoid their fire. Sometimes they'll shoot once, in which case, okay, that's probably easy enough to avoid. Other times, they're going to turn into machine gun turrets and just pepper you with projectiles. And then other times still, they may not even spawn in the stage. This is a game that is just horribly balanced, with enemy placement that borders on insane. I dare say, whoever designed this one has never played a quality action platformer in their lives, because holy cow, anyone trying to play this game would have quickly realized this was a mess. The sad part is, this could have been something that was somewhat interesting to play through. It's just designed so poorly that you really won't want to play through this one. Overall, I feel like this must have been designed by a madman, and I probably wouldn't touch it. Maybe play the first level just to get a feel for it. I wouldn't keep playing it beyond that. And finally, after over a month of talking about Action 52, we have reached our final game, which is the big one. This one is Action Game Master, starring the Cheetah Men. This is it. This is the final game on the cartridge, arguably the biggest name in the entire collection. And when you start up the game, you can automatically tell that there was a lot of attention given to this one. I mean, it begins with a cutscene. No other game in the collection has a cutscene. Most other games don't even have a title screen, but this one had a cutscene to begin the game, which tells you somebody thought this was going to be a great idea. In the game, you have to beat 6 different levels, and you control one of 3 different Cheetah Men as you play through the game. 2 levels for each Cheetah Man. So the way it works is stage 1 and 2 is one of the Cheetah Men. Stage 3 and 4 is another Cheetah Man, and stage 5 and 6 is yet another Cheetah Man. They all have names. By the way, I think one of them is named Hercules, the other one is named Ares, the other one is named I don't remember and I don't care. But you do have 3 different Cheetah Men. It's not like you can pick from any of them. You basically get assigned what Cheetah Man plays for each stage. And the way the stages work, so you have stage 1, which is a side-scrolling beat-em-up with depth, meaning not only do you move from left to right, but you can actually navigate into and out of the screen, kind of like what you'd see in Double Dragon. And honestly, I was kind of impressed with this stage. I didn't expect this level of detail and stage design to be present in Action 52, but very first stage of Cheetah Man, or Cheetah Men, it kind of impressed me. I will admit it. Stage 2 is a more traditional 2D side-scrolling action platforming experience, which honestly, not bad for what it was. It's a very different environment. You can actually see the differences in the environments here, by the way. So this game is by far the most varied from stage to stage. If you move on to stage 3, you get a new Cheetah Man to utilize, and you get the same kind of side-scrolling action platforming as you saw in stage 2. This stage, however, kinda sucks, as there are multiple enemies that act as turrets of sorts and will pepper you with damage whenever they want, while other enemies will spawn and chase you down very quickly, making it so that you have to have split-second timing in order to hit them and not have them hit you. And actually, I should probably mention that one of the things that makes this game particularly interesting is the fact that all of these stages are made up of enemies from the various other Action 52 titles, meaning this is truly the culmination of the entire experience. If you've played all 51 other games, you will see references to all 51 of those games located somewhere within Cheetah Men. And I've got to say, kind of an interesting concept. I can get behind the overall concept. If the enemies sucked in the other games, which almost all of them did, they still suck here. So don't think, oh, you got to go play this one. No. The enemies still are absolutely awful here, but I did think it was a cool concept to take all of that stuff from the other games and have them effectively be cameos in Cheetah Men. Anyway, move past stage 3, you get to stage 4, and you know what? Stage 4 here is where we warped to from Billy Bob's second stage. So this is the spot you should be playing Cheetah Men. You should not be playing Cheetah Men when you're playing Billy Bob, But if you're playing Cheetah Men and you reach stage 4, that's obviously appropriate. Now, I will say this stage is not the greatest side-scrolling level, though it's really not bad as long as you inch forward to spawn enemies before you randomly hit them. Because if you move through the stage like you would a traditional platformer, you're likely going to collide with some enemies, and that's not so great. They're going to drop your hit points, and that just makes things a lot more challenging. So I advise you to just inch forward a little bit at a time, make those enemies spawn and come to you, and then you can move forward without taking too much damage. There is a boss fight at the end of stage 4, by the way, and all I will say is that boss fight is absolutely atrocious and is nearly impossible to beat, unless you get very lucky by hugging the left-hand side of the screen. When the boss spawns, it will immediately charge at you, and if you're not quick, it will collide with you and it will be instant death, which means you have to restart that stage and try to get back up to the boss. If you move all the way to the left-hand side of the screen, you should be safe. Mostly, because occasionally the boss will still randomly hit you, even if you haven't moved at all. And even if the side of the screen is supposed to be entirely safe, sometimes a phantom collision happens and you die. And like I mentioned, if you get hit by this boss at all, even though you have hit points in this game, even though you have some hit points and hits you can take, if you get hit once by the boss, it is game over. You've got to restart the level, which really isn't great when it happens, especially when it's not supposed to happen because you're in a safe spot, or at least a supposedly safe spot in the overall level. Anyway, if you get past that boss, you will reach stage 5, which is when you take control of a new Cheetah Man who can fire arrows. This is by far the worst level in the entire game. The character can shoot a bow, like I mentioned, though the issue is that the enemies in this stage are designed the same way as enemies in a couple of other Action 52 platformers, where they spawn and then change their height as they make their way towards you. You cannot avoid these bad guys. You can't jump over them. You can't try to duck under them. You simply need to defeat them. And sometimes that is legitimately impossible, like literally impossible, because there's going to be some spawns where there just isn't enough time for them to reach a shootable height before they close the distance and kill you. This level is absolutely pure crap, and I despised everything about Stage 5. Stage 6, by contrast, is a very simple level. There are no enemies, you just have to go through some platforming sections and then you reach a boss, which is a totally ho-hum kind of encounter. Because you're controlling the Cheetah Man that can shoot, all you got to do is shoot a flying bird a bunch of times and then you beat him, and then guess what happens? You beat the game. Or at least I should say the game resets itself and recycles back to the 1-2 player screen selection. So basically there's no title screen with Cheetah Men, even though there was a cutscene to begin the game. There is no title screen. So if you beat the game, you just get dropped back out to the selection where you can pick between 1-player and 2-player, and then that's it. Okay, look, I can see that there was actual effort here with Cheetah Men. The problem is that most of it just falls completely flat. Nothing about this game should have made anyone think there was a franchise here or a potential franchise here. You would have had to have been either delusional, insane, or a total con man to present this as anything resembling the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or any other popular franchise that could have had toys and movies and books and comic books and all this kind of stuff. There is nothing with the Cheetah Men that lends itself to any of that. It is just designed too poorly. I will say, this was not the worst game on the cartridge, and I appreciated the relatively okay controls and some interesting inclusions in various stages, like secrets and warp zones. I didn't mention this, but there are actually some secrets and warp zones included in some of the stages. This was definitely a game that had some attention paid to it. Even so, it's just not that great. If you are curious about Cheetah Men, I would say give it a shot, play it as a curiosity, but don't really play it much longer than you need to. It's really not worth it, though I will say it's definitely obvious that some attention was paid to this title, certainly more so than some of the other games that we've covered. So, that is it. That is Action 52, and man, was that a journey. That was over a month worth of Action 52 exclusive coverage. The question is, was it worth it? So, what do you think? what was our verdict on Action 52? Well, I've got to say, you know how sometimes when people say that something is like the worst game of all time, and then I play it and I come back to you and I say, now, you know what? It really wasn't one of the worst games of all time. And it was bad, but it wasn't one of the worst games of all time. Well, I can safely say I don't have that opinion here. Action 52 is one of the worst games of all time, and it's exponentially worse than many of the other worst games of all time, because many of the 52 games included within Action 52 are the worst games of all time, or close to the worst games of all time. So, having played 52 games, many of which would be on the worst games of all time list by themselves, I can safely say that Action 52 is the biggest pile of crap that we have ever covered on this podcast. And it says something that I spent more time talking about Action 52 than I have any other game that we've covered. That is a little crazy to me. It's probably a little insane that we ended up doing this, but I will say I feel a sense of closure. Now, I feel a sense of closure that we actually made it through all of these games, and I can say definitively, this is one of the worst games of all time. So, overall verdict, this is like below the footnote. I mean, this isn't a footnote. This is way below the footnotes. This is like approaching seventh circle of hell, maybe is the way we should categorize it. It is so frustrating, so bad. It took so long to play through. I have forgotten what good game design is because I've been spending so much time playing Action 52. That being said, not every experience on the cartridge was a bad experience. And I actually have 5 games I have selected that I believe are the best games that Action 52 has to offer. And I'll give you those top 5 in chronological order, meaning from number 1 to 52. These are the top 5 games in the entire collection. The first one is Illuminator. The reason I like this one is because of the concept. I thought the whole concept of the lights shutting off and having to shoot enemies with a projectile and then the lights turn back on for a second or two, I thought it was a great concept. That's a main reason why I had suggested that if this were remade, it actually would be something kind of decent. And Fat Hippo actually did do that. I had put the link in the show notes for the last episode. I played it. It's great. I mean, it's still an Action 52 remake, so, take that for what it is. But I think Fat Hippo did a great job redoing Illuminator and keeping the same exact style, basically the same exact controls, but just enhancing it a little bit. You can play it and it still feels like Illuminator other than some of the other games that people have created. Like there was this project called Action 52 Owns, which was an attempt at remaking a lot of the games in Action 52 to try to make them not totally suck. The issue that I have with Action 52 Owns is the fact that so many of those games were the Action 52 games in name only, meaning you might be playing one of the games. Like, let's say you're playing Sharks as an example. Well, it kind of does its own thing. It redoes the entire experience and it loses the essence of what the original experience was. Fat Hippo's Illuminator remake keeps the feeling of Illuminator, but it enhances it, which I thought was a great way to do it. It wasn't a total redo. It didn't throw out the original. It just built upon the original and made it better, which is exactly what I feel like some of these games should have. If they were remade, I would keep a lot of the original stuff. I would just make it smoother. I would make it better. I would make them better controls. I would just improve the experience. I wouldn't totally redo the whole experience. So anyway, Illuminator, one of the games on my top 5. The second game in my top 5 is Shooting Gallery. It was super simple. It was kind of like a mini shareware kind of experience, but I will say that the game as designed actually functions as designed. You don't need to remake this one, really. I mean, it's kind of there. It works. It's not offensive. For that, I appreciated it. The third game on my top 5 is Laser League. From my perspective, that's the best scrolling side-scrolling shooter on the entire cartridge. It was super simple, but it worked and it didn't have many issues and it wasn't offensive in terms of challenge or crazy difficulty or anything like that. So Laser League, definitely one of my top 5. My fourth on my top 5. And once again, this is not in like top 5 order. It's just in the sequence that we played through the games. The 4th is Billy Bob. I thought that was really unique, especially compared to the rest of Action 52 to have a cinematic platformer. I thought it was great. It was unfortunate that there were only 2 levels there before my game decided to totally screw up and go to Cheetah Men Stage 4. And it's not like I had just tried it once and it just randomly glitched. I played through it a few times to test if there was an issue, and there is in fact an issue with this version of the release where it just pops over to Cheetah Men Stage 4, so I couldn't really experience the rest of Billy Bob. But what I did experience, it was unique, it was kind of fun. I could see this one being something that I would challenge myself to try to play more and more. And then finally, the 5th game in our top 5, and honestly the best game on the cartridge, is Ninja Assault. And the reason I chose that one is because it's actually almost a real game. I mean, it's only 4 stages, and the 4th stage is broken. And it's, you know, there's lots of things here that could be done better. But at the end of the day, it's actually close to a game. And I appreciate it. I think Ninja Assault was fine. And I actually recommend you all give that one a shot, because it shows you that there is not total drivel throughout the entire Action 52 experience. There's just mostly drivel. Ninja Assault kind of rises above the pack and becomes my favorite game on the entire cartridge. You might be wondering what my least favorite game on the entire cartridge is. That's got to be Micro Mike. Micro Mike was just designed so poorly. It was so challenging, impossible, literally impossible to beat, whether you're talking about navigating the stages, which honestly, that part I was able to get through. But then when you get to the final boss fight and some of the projectiles that spawn in a way that you can't possibly avoid them, it is just a soul-sucking experience. Micro Mike by far is the worst game on the cartridge. But overall, that's Action 52. That's 52 games. Over the course of just a little bit over a month, we have finally done it. We have finally gotten through it. I want to say that one of the reasons I started playing this early on is that there were some comments made that I was taking it easy by playing too many good games, too many Pantheon entries, too many golden oldies. I feel like I've had my penance. Now, if anybody thought that I was taking it easy, the last month should prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that I have balanced things out. We now have the yin and yang back. Things are in balance again because I have just put myself through an experience. I don't believe I want to do this again. I mean, I'll tell you right now, I feel like I want to play normal games again. I don't want to touch Action 52 ever again. Certainly not the NES version. Maybe at some point the Sega Genesis version, though that's a whole other can of worms. I started to mess around with that a little bit, and I said to myself, no, I got to take a break. This is, it's going to eat my soul, and I don't want that. But anyway, Action 52 as a collection, absolutely atrocious, a big steaming pile of crap, and something that you should all avoid. It was definitely a curiosity, but at the end of the day, is simply a footnote for the footnotes. It's even beyond that. It is just atrocious. Do not play this game. Do not try it. Don't ever pick it up. It's radioactive waste. It's manure. It's the worst, one of the worst things you could ever try to touch. If you want to try it, go ahead, but I'm not even going to generate challenges for this game because I don't want anybody to put themselves through it. That's how strongly I feel about how bad Action 52 is. It is definitely one for the ages, but I can't say that this is anything like a classic. It is pure nonsense. It is definitely a footnote in gaming history. That was our final episode on Action 52. I hope you all enjoyed listening to it way more than I enjoyed playing the game. If you'd like to reach out, let me know how I'm doing, provide feedback, comments, suggestions, or just talk about classic games and technology in general, I would love to hear from you, and there are a few ways you can reach out. I have an X account with the handle @ClassicGamingT. I have an email address, which is classicgamingtoday@gmail.com, and we have our Discord server. The link is in the show notes. Discord is the best way to get in touch with me and the rest of the community around this podcast. We have a ton of fun out on Discord. I highly encourage you all to check it out. I also highly encourage you to check out our Patreon. It's patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday. If you want even more Classic Gaming Today goodness, including a Patreon exclusive bi-weekly podcast, expansion pack, patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday is where it's at. Before we sign off for the week, I do want to mention that our next episode is going to be returning to the realm of possibly good games. We're going to talk about Dark Forces, and in particular, Dark Forces Remastered. So definitely write in if you have any particularly fond or not so fond memories of that experience, and get your comments featured on the show. At the same time, I recognize you're likely listening to this podcast on any number of podcast services. And if you would feel so inclined, it would be great if you could leave me a review. This is not about trying to bolster star counts. This is not about trying to harvest a ton of 5-star ratings. Though if that happens, awesome, it means we're doing something right. No, what it's really all about is trying to deliver the best possible podcast I can. The only way to do that is to get feedback from all of you, the listener community, to make sure I'm hitting the mark and delivering the content you all want to listen to. We get new listeners every single day, which is simply amazing. I want to continue to grow this community and continue to make the best possible podcast I can. We'll be back in around a week with our next episode focused on Dark Forces. Until then, remember, sometimes the games of the past are just as good, if not better, than the games of today. Goodbye, everyone.